Moving on here and going to another part of the world, we'll go to the United States. And I went to the Field Museum in Chicago in November 2012. And the use of QR, or quick response codes, is increasingly prevalent in different museums, where you can scan the little QR code there and it might take you to a web page with further written info or a video. And you can have more interactive media. It doesn't have to be digital interactive media. You've got just the tactile nature of touching fossils and being able to pick up bones and feel how heavy they are. There's an element of interactivity that's not necessarily anything to do with digital media, but digital media can arguably enhance that, and that's what museums are playing with. So even just pushing a button and selecting what you want to hear about. But you can see here, things can date very, very quickly, and that would cost quite a bit of money to replace. This was actually a very dark room where you see the mummy here. My flash of my camera is lit it up for us, but you can see what I was talking about before with the concept of gamification. And this will look very familiar when I zoom up on the instructions here. Use the controller to view the mummy inside and out, so you can see the different buttons and what they basically enable the user to do, and that might look incredibly familiar to a lot of people, particularly gamers. So is this the gamification of history? What does all this mean? Well, Stephen Conn wrote in 2010 in a provocative book he called Do Museums Still Need Objects? He wrote the place of objects in museums has shrunk as people have lost faith in the ability of objects alone to tell stories and convey knowledge. And the really important word in this sentence is alone, and I've emphasised that myself in italics. Because he's saying people have lost faith in the ability of objects alone, of objects on their own to tell stories. So it's not that they're irrelevant anymore, but the digital screen media of our day may well help enhance engagement with these physical objects. So it doesn't necessarily replace them. So there's an emphasis on interactivity here, and the positioning of what I call the visitor-viewer. The term viewer, obviously combining viewer and user, is in a different way from the producer. It's been used in earlier literature on digital TV multi-platforming, and I've adopted it for museums because we're not really talking about the producers or prosumers that we've been discussing in the unit. However, I do draw a distinction between the terms interactivity and agency, because there is a spectrum of these things, and as things move forward, we see the visitor or a user of different media being granted more and more agency, more and more freedom to participate, to actively engage, and to create and produce. And the key point here, the takeaway point from this week, if you only take 1 point away, is that on this interactivity agency spectrum, the further away you get from the stagnant or the basic kind of interactivity of just pressing a button or pulling a lever and seeing what happens, the further you get towards agency, the more and more issues, ethical and otherwise, arise. So the more and more potential rewards you get, the more and more potential benefits there are, often come with more agency, granting the visitor more agency. But for a museum and other media industries, the more and more agency your, what used to be called audience have, the more and more risk there is. So you can see that when I make a video of the Melbourne Museum C exhibit, I could actually make an anti-environmental video using that footage and my own narrative voiceover. Can the museum do anything about that? No, not really. So how did they engage with that? Could they actually be encouraging other visitors to create media so that even if there is the odd negative media creation out there, maybe there are more positive or overwhelmingly more positive ones? That's a key issue for museums to navigate. And it gets even more tricky when we look at case studies coming up later on. But does the rise of gamification mean the end of the physical artifact? Does play, the concept of play, lead to more effective engagement or mask mere surface learning? There's a key tension here between education and what many people have called edutainment. Michelle Henning has argued that museums are often characterised as media in themselves. Museums and new media share what Henning calls the twin functions of storage and display. So even before we start to combine these things, museums have for many, many years actually served similar functions to what we now use digital media for. And new media allows more of a museum's research collection or archives, which are often kept in the basement. You just don't have space to actually show things, and the vast majority of artifacts at many museums, most museums, are actually kind of hidden away. Digital media might provide a more diverse engagement through the exhibition because it allows you to access more. And it's interesting that Henning calls the exhibition the interface, which is a term often related to screen media. New media also allows visitors to break free of what Henning sees as the curator's constraints. Other people have argued there is a very big danger in allowing too much freedom for visitors and not having the curator's overarching kind of design and guidance. But that's an interesting debate in itself. However, again, a key point here relating to that education-edutainment tension, new media might also promote what Henning phrases as a channel-flipping form of attention. And that's really important to think about. So, what, if anything, changes in relation to all of these issues when the phenomenon being represented here is of a more sensitive nature? And we turn here to the Holocaust, our subject of most of the field trip. Here's an image from Auschwitz-Birkenau, and we've taken you from Melbourne in the United States now over to Europe. And I took my dad on a 3 to 4 week trip through Europe, and we visited a couple of concentration camps and various other museums throughout different countries. So when we look at the Holocaust, an unprecedented historical event involving the mass murder of 6 million of Europe's Jews, we're looking at a very difficult subject when it comes to talking about how digital media and even the idea of gamification might actually enhance things. And you can see here some images, and I need to give some credit to my dad, who's a much better photographer than me. He did an amazing job of getting some photos. So you can see here in Auschwitz-Birkenau, which was where the vast majority of Jews in Auschwitz were gassed. You can see here through the barracks and the latrines and the various kinds of external shots we've got here of just the massive size of the place. The vast majority of the time most people were taken straight to the gas chambers. Here you've got the undressing area in the forest where people were hidden among the trees and then walked straight through to the gas chambers. Usually within an hour of arriving at the camp, the Jews were killed. And you've got here the ruins of several of the 4 main gas chambers and crematoria in Auschwitz were in Auschwitz-Birkenau. And overall, up to 10,000 Jews could be, using the euphemistic term that was used at the time, processed, killed and cremated per day. One of the key ideas of the Holocaust representation is representing the unrepresentable. How do you represent this? How do you comprehend what is essentially incomprehensible? And you've also got here the lake where people were, after they were cremated and bones were crushed, their remains were left. That was one of the locations there. So you can see the vast expanse of this camp here. And how do we deal with this kind of space? Could we actually have a virtual tour? I'm sure there are many videos online that people have put up on YouTube. Can you actually replace a physical visit to this kind of site with digital media? Moving on here to the use of documentary screen digital media more broadly in Holocaust memorialisation, my dad and I went to Dachau, the first concentration camp, which was erected in 1933. And you can see that there my dad has an audio kind of device that he can push some buttons on when he's in different parts of the camp and gets more details about the various aspects of the setting if he wants to. And you can see here along the walls of the museum part of Dachau and the kind of the entrance building, your use of interactive media does date. It's no doubt they've been there for some years, but it does date. We also found this temporary exhibition in Rome, just stumbled across it, which was also on the Holocaust, and you can see the kind of more modern looking flat screen monitors here with your footage. You've also got the use of traditional artifacts. Here there's an image of the train tracks with some letters left behind for family members laid there as well. So you've always got the physical artifact interacting with the digital. The German Historical Museum in Berlin, a huge museum, is again quite conservative in its use of media. Note the small size of the screens as well. But what you see here, these are some of my favourite photographs of media in museums. You see the positioning of screen media as almost sacred. You've almost got religious connotations in the kind of altar-like way in which these screens are positioned around the museum with seats that clearly position you to be very respectful, sit and look at the screen and not do anything else. So you can see the anxiety around screen media here. This is a temporary exhibition, again an interesting use of screen media, not so much interactive, but there are a number of screens within these crates which were symbolising the expropriated, the stolen artworks of Jews by Germans, most of which has not been returned. And going forward to the Jewish Museum in Berlin, you've got two rather large buildings here. I'll take you through the large one on the right first, and then the more sort of jagged-looking building there is another interesting strategy for representing the Holocaust. The Jewish Museum as a whole is not actually invested in solely or even mostly in the memory of the Holocaust. It's actually about Jewish culture and society more generally over the centuries. But there is some Holocaust exhibits. These images here really show that you've got a strong marginalisation of screen media and interactive media generally, things tucked away in the corner, almost just to be hidden away toward the end of exhibits, and that's quite telling when I saw that. And this is only a couple of years ago, obviously. This is probably the most aesthetically displeasing thing I've ever seen in any museum. I didn't spend too much time trying to work out what it was, but you can see again how things can date rather quickly, and I didn't probably see anyone, I don't know if they'd see many people at all engaging with this little contraption here. You do have some, getting more and more, this is obviously quite old probably by this stage too, but an interactive kind of storytelling device here too that you can click through. This is the Daniel Libeskind designed museum, which is based on memorialising the Holocaust, and it's interesting, there's absolutely no screen media involved, no digital media is utilised at all in this setting, so you've got an interesting kind of complete rejection of digital media. Here we have the Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe in Berlin, and this is situated at a very significant place, quite central in the city, and you've got a range, I can't remember how many, stone pillars in this setting. We were there in January in the middle of winter, and it was incredibly dangerous to walk through because of the ice, but underneath this memorial you can see there is a museum down the bottom, and you do have some uses of projectors, and you can see there though, and moving forward to this image here of my dad in the corner there, you're positioned to undertake the kind of interaction with media, in this case audio media, in a very isolated way. You're positioned to be, you should be on your own while you're doing this. At the end of the museum, you can see in this large picture here, this is actually a database of names connected back to Yad Vashem. So the more interactive media, perhaps, is actually kind of outside the museum itself, which is quite significant. Here is a picture of a car park, and it's interesting that not everything is memorialised. Underneath this car park was where Adolf Hitler's bunker was, where he committed suicide toward the end of the war. So you can see that that's actually just across the road from that large memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe. So you've got a huge Holocaust memorial there, and that's commemorating the Holocaust, and just over the road was where Hitler's bunker was, and that is a car park. I also wanted to acknowledge this memorial here, a monument to the homosexuals persecuted under Nazism, many of whom, predominantly gay men, were sent to camps for their sexual preference. And it was really interesting. I asked a number of people in nearby businesses, really businesses they were working full-time in cafes on the same street, just at the end of which was this monument, and everyone I asked didn't know where this was. So it's quite interesting that this was sort of hidden away, and I wanted to make sure I found it. So what roles can digital media and gamification play in relation to the memorialisation, the commemoration of the Holocaust? I said at the field trip that the most common question I'm asked by survivor guides, and I was really taken aback when I was first asked this, and I was quite emotional and didn't really know how to answer it, is how do we reach the young people? Survivors are increasingly concerned that they can't get through to young people, and how do they engage the interest and attention and form some kind of understanding in young people's minds? Well, digital media can have a role to play. Henning writes that skeptics see new media as threatening the authenticity of the artifact, the authority of traditional sources of knowledge, and as vulgarising museums, turning them into commercialised sites for edutainment. I suggest that new media is best thought of as a means to organise and structure knowledge and visitor attention in the museum, not as a means of communication or set of devices. Through kiosks and touchscreens representing objects that are not on display, and contextual information beyond that given in labels and exhibition text, it seems possible to produce a deeper and more diverse engagement between visitors and the museum.